Welcome to the How To Home Podcast, presented by FilterBuy. I'm your host, Aaron Massey, a DIY home improvement enthusiast and full-time content creator running MrFixItDIY.com. Alongside me is my co-host, Tracy Pendergast, a home and lifestyle blogger operating her website, HeyTracy.com. Each week, we'll cover the real-world ups and downs of owning a home, answer your questions, and if we don't have the answers, we'll talk to some experts to help you get the most out of your remodel, repair, and home improvement projects. So without further ado, let's start the show. Welcome to another episode of the How To Home Podcast. My name is Aaron Massey, and joining me as always is my lovely co-host Tracy Pendergast. And also joining us today is Adam Esparza from Ale Tile Company. I can't thank you enough for being here. I'm very excited. I'm like geeking out because I've got all sorts of tile questions.
He's really excited.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Aaron.
We've been going back and forth a little bit on Instagram for the last couple years.
Yeah.
And I always ask him tile questions, and we've never met face to face, so this is new. Why don't you give the audience a little bit of a background on you and your company?
Well, I'm a second generation tile contractor. My dad and my uncle both are in the trade. Well, a few of my uncles actually. So it is a family business. And I mean, ever since I was a little kid, I've been, on the summer times going to the job sites and getting to see how it's done. And never thought I'd be a tile contractor myself, but here I am. And so I've been doing it for about 15 years and I'm just enjoying what I do and having fun.
And you do some phenomenal work. If people want to check you out on Instagram, that's how I found you, or I don't even remember how we kind of got in contact, but we communicate a lot through Instagram, and It's at Ale Tile, A-L-E-T-I-L-E. Before we dive into today's topic, which is all things tile, I just want to remind the audience that the show is kind of powered by their suggestions and questions. And if they want to get in touch with us, please give us a call at our voicemail number at 978-709-1040. You can leave us suggestions for upcoming episodes. You can leave us questions for contractors like yourself about tile or home improvement in general. And you can also reach us on social media at the links in the show notes, or you can email me directly at Aaron@howtohome.com. And of course, before we go any further, we want to thank our founding sponsor of the How To Home podcast, which is, of course, FilterBuy.
Yes.
FilterBuy is an HVAC filter provider, and they ship directly to consumers. So you just sign up on their website, input your filter sizes, and they ship them directly to your door. You don't need to set reminders on how often you want to change your filters. They send them to you on the schedule that you want, and they're there when you need them.
And of course, that extends the life of your HVAC system, and it cuts down your energy costs. And there's more. They ship within 24 hours, so that is awesome.
And they are a family-owned company right here in the U.S.
Why
Everything
would
is
you
manufactured
go
and
anywhere
shipped
else?
Amazing.
right here from the U.S.
Yeah.
So speaking of family-owned companies, you own your own tile company.
Nice
do.
segue.
And I've got questions.
All right.
Because I've done a lot of tile, and I think I'm pretty good at it until I look at the type of stuff that you do. And then I'm like, I'm not good at it. I learn a ton.
It's all smoke and mirrors. I mean, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, it's all the magic of Instagram and social media.
Totally. Editing the pictures, making sure you got the right angles.
You don't
right?
even, you just take a picture of a blank wall, go online, download a picture of tiles, throw it up there, and be like, yeah, I did that.
That's me, my handiwork.
So talk to me a little bit about your process. It's different than anything I've ever done because you do a lot of what I call, I consider it floating a mortar bed. Is that?
That's correct.
That's what it's called.
Yes.
When a client comes to you, where do you start?
It does depend on what it is. Whether it's a backsplash and we're just going on drywall, I would use a different adhesive than if I was doing, thin set on cement, like a cement floor or something. So it all depends. And then another thing is, a shower. What applications are you using with a shower? I tend to just go more towards doing a mortar bed just because that's what I'm used to. And I almost more consider myself not so much just a tile guy, but a plaster and also a mason. I really like doing that sort of stuff. So, people say, well, why are you going all that route to float a wall? Well, there's a lot of things that I could do, that allow me to change the layout and if the space isn't square or plumb. It's just that one time of me doing that brown coat, it fixes all of those problems all at that one time. Whereas, if you use a different thing, Hardy Backer or the foam board that's out now, there's shimming and there's different things. And if there's a niche, you're kind of set on what that size is. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it all varies.
Well, I mean, we're gonna dive into all that stuff right now. So I have a bunch of questions lined up. First and foremost, as a DIY guy and doing tile myself, I make mistakes all the time. What are some common mistakes that you think an average person, a DIY person, makes that maybe you have enough experience where you don't make those mistakes anymore?
Not hiring someone.
Yeah. It all starts in the beginning, and it all starts with your layout. And that's just it. As more and more we're seeing these decorative tiles and these patterned tiles, you really have to, create basically what you're putting up on the wall or the floor, on the floor, wherever, story poles, what they call it, and really make sure that you're going to have that tile start from there and it's going to end there. And making sure it's all symmetrical and whatever the layout, is what you want it to be. So it all starts in the beginning with layout, and it could just make the tile job not look good if it's not laid out right.
Little slivers of tiles.
Sliver cuts, or if it's not level, you could see it going off. And if you're using, more of that, like the sheeted material, like the penny rounds we were talking about earlier, like you could see, where that sheet ends if it's not perfect, and so it really comes down to making sure you're lining up right and you're staying on the course, And you
call yourself kind of like an old world craftsman.
Yes.
And I mean, what you do really is kind of art. It's an artistry to do tile well because of those things. It's like having consistent grout lines, having, don't having that lippage where one tile's significantly lower than the other. There's a lot of things.
Yeah, there is.
That when you first tackle a DIY tile job, and I've encountered it many times, where those things kind of arise as the project goes, and you don't really notice it maybe. And I think a lot of what you're saying is it comes down to that prep, that initial prep and that layout.
Prep, 100%. Yeah, because it's like L cuts and I'm always trying to avoid that stuff, like having an L cut, or you're always wanting full tile. That's the whole thing. It's like, if you could achieve full tile, then you're golden, because you're able to not have anything your eyes not drawn to it, basically.
How involved are you in the design process? If someone came to you and had some ideas for a laundry room, say, do you ever say that tile probably isn't a good idea here, or this might look better?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, but a lot of it has to do with just the space where you're working and like what you're going to be doing. Obviously, if it's a high traffic area, you don't want something that's going to cause, there's all this dirt on it, or beveled. There's all kinds of different tiles now that it's like that's going to create dirt, and there's going to be, I'm very practical because I have 4 kids, so I'm always leaning more towards the like, okay, what's gonna, stay durable as long as possible, and what's, gonna look good after 30 years,
Right. So what are some trendy tiles right now that are really good looking, but not necessarily a great idea?
Great question. And the first thing that comes to my mind is the cement tiles. The cement tiles, they have to be treated properly. They have to be installed properly. They have to be sealed properly. And they're high maintenance. And it's crazy because they actually have porcelain tile that is printed on, you could print pretty much anything nowadays, that looks just like that decorative cement tile for way cheaper, and it's way more durable, So I always tell people, hey, if you're wanting to save a little bit of money and you're a very practical person, try getting, this different material as opposed to, that. And I
think they're hard to clean, aren't they?
They totally are. Yeah. And you're always having to reseal them after a certain time period too. So
no one's got time for that.
No one's got time for that.
No.
But they are beautiful,
They are.
know, and so it's really hard.
And if you have the financial means to have
Yes.
someone constantly come
Do
out
it.
and
Yeah.
treat them, then why not?
Well, they're
But
very porous, right? Cement tiles.
are, yeah.
So they can absorb, if you
They
got
absorb
muddy
everything.
boots and everything, it's going to soak in and eventually,
Yes.
tint it, make it, you're going to have blotchy stains and all that stuff if you don't seal it. you know?
Totally. Yeah. If you're not sealing it correctly, that happens. Yeah.
There's a lot of new products out there and some old products as far as subfloor installation and stuff. I've always typically put down like a cement backer board. There's now like the Kerdi products and some of the other subfloor products that you put down as kind of the substrate beneath your tile. Any advantages or disadvantages to doing that, in your opinion, as opposed to maybe doing a subfloor float,
Yes.
kind of like what you're talking about?
Yes, totally. Well, there's certain things for certain applications. And, if you're on a raised foundation and you have, just plywood subfloor, and it's fairly flat, I tell people hardy backer's fine, as long as you do it right, yeah, you're good. But there's certain times where you can't use hardy backer. Say, for instance, you're on a slab floor, and the floor is all wonky and stuff, and you don't want to set on that, then you're going to have to think about doing something else, And so I always tend to go, okay, well, let's see where how our foundation looks, and if I have to do it in a mortar bed, and that's dry pack. And that will just give you a perfectly straight, flat floor to set your tile on, And then you have things like that. There's a mat that a lot of companies have come out with. But the downside, again, with that, though, is, you're going on whatever the floor is doing. It's getting glued on that floor. So is that floor flat? Is that floor, good to go? It's because it's going to follow it. So then you're having to, do different things like using like whether it's an Ardex feather finish to, get that area flat, or they have self-leveling products that you pour down and it hardens and it, gets it nice and flat for you. So there is so much stuff on the market now.
What it comes down to is if the floor is not perfectly level, and this is in my experience, I kind of tend to lean towards a larger format tile because you can hide it a little easier. Whereas if you're using a smaller format tile, and what I mean by that is just like the size of the tile itself, it's going to follow every little contour in that floor. And obviously you want to try and get the floor as level as possible, but if you can't maybe get it perfectly level, or, get it so if you're in a really old home and it's just cost prohibitive or whatever,
Yeah.
maybe a larger format tile might be the way to go, because you can kind of hide the edges and kind of ride it, and hide some of that in your mortar bed. I've never used any of those products outside of the cement backer board. Do you ever use them? Like the Kerdi boards or any of the newer stuff?
Are we talking about for a floor or?
Well, they have like the shower surround kits now, I know.
Yes.
But they're expensive.
They are very expensive. And so that's just it, is a lot of people ask me, like, why don't you just use, some of that product? And well, yeah, it's very it costs a lot.
And you're going to pass that on to your client.
Right. But at the same time too, it's kind of one of those things where you're having to do a lot of shimming and stuff with that material. I don't see anything wrong with it. I think it's great. A lot of these companies, they provide a warranty and they give you all this stuff, which is cool. But there's something about, for me, this is just personal. There's something about creating a cement wall, compared to a foam wall that I feel like I could just punch my hand through the tile and I'll get through,
Right.
And another thing with a mortar bed, for instance, the waterproofing is actually behind it. You have a waterproof paper that's behind all the cement. If, say, for instance, I'm working with a designer and I'm using natural marble, and I'm setting a wall and they look at one of the tiles and they're like, that color with that marble, I don't like it. Can you? This has happened before. I don't like that specific tile. Can you take that out and put a different one on? And for me, it's not a big deal because I'm only hitting my cement. and I'm chipping away at my cement. And the waterproofing, again, is still behind the cement. So I'm confident in the fact that I could pop that thing off, use my thin set, put it back, good to go. If I used something like that other product, the waterproofing is right at the surface. So when I pop off that tile, I'm pulling off all of the waterproofing. And that's a thing that's really scary to me. And so I talk to these reps and stuff, and they say, well, we have this caulking and you could tape it up. And I've done that before, and it doesn't usually come out the way I want it to. And the tile's protruding now.
Right, wow.
There's too much stuff around. So there's situations like that where I'm like, you know, I think I'll just stick to what I'm used to and what I'm comfortable in. And, you know, it's been, for generations, it's been a great, you know,
thousands of
substrate.
years.
Well, yeah, you go to Spain, you go to different places, and it's like all that tile's still there. Is Kerdi board back behind that tile? I don't think so.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, and then the material is really cheap. It's sand, cement. Like, it's very cheap, you know. I don't have to pay extra money for it, you know, so.
I've never tried to do what you do in the floating of the mortar bed. Like, do you mix your own stuff? Is that something that you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever, and you can buy that like dry pack that you call it? Or how does that work?
So that's two different things. A wall mud is a fat mud, and it's cement, lime, and sand. The lime is what makes it real sticky, so it could just slap right up on the wall and it doesn't fall. So there's that. And yes, you could buy a pre-mix at Home Depot. It's called Spec Mix. It already has those three things in it. I think there's more in there too, because when I use it, it seems to be a little more sticky than my liking. So I usually do it myself because I like the ratio that I'm comfortable with. So I usually do it myself. For a dry pack, it's literally just sand and cement. And that's all you need, because obviously it's on the floor. You're not needing it to be on the wall or anything. And so that's all you need to make that dry pack, and it hardens up real good.
So if I try to do that, how would I do that? I go to Home Depot and buy like specific sand and specific cement, or and then
just
what's the ratio?
Normal washed sand, and then you have lime and cement. The ratio that I usually, a rule of thumb, I always go off of a shovel.
Okay.
And so if you could imagine, I'll say, okay, I need a shovel of cement, a shovel of lime, to 4 shovels of sand. So that's my ratio usually when it comes to wall mud. And you mix that all up, and there you got your wall mud.
And what about the floor?
And so the floor, I would do 1 shovel of cement to about 4 to 5 shovels of sand is a good ratio. And you always have to watch your water. You know, you don't want it too wet. You don't want it too dry.
And then you just kind of, you know, when we say floating a mortar bed, it's like you're taking that shovel full of the mixture that you've created, dumped it on the floor, and then you're kind of just using a level or whatever to screed it so that it's perfectly, truly flat. Or in the case of like a shower pan, it slopes into the drain.
Yep.
That's one thing that I'm scared of, shower pan things, because I come from the school of there's 2 types of concrete. There's concrete that's cracked, and there's concrete that will crack. And so as a shower pan, I'm super scared of trying to do one of these dry packs. And I know everybody does it, like yourself. Yeah. I'm just afraid that it's going to crack and it's going to get water down through there. And that water is ultimately going to turn into black mold, and my house is going to get condemned. You know what I mean? Like, that's the mistake, that it doesn't happen. You don't know right away that you've made a mistake. It's years and years later or whatever. There's something that has triggered the mold building behind there. Yeah. That I'm afraid of, that can have serious consequences. You know,
Absolutely.
It can cost you a ton of money. You got to tear that out. You got a whole mold abatement treatment. You got to go through the whole thing. Yep. So like what you're saying, that's really attractive to me, to have that waterproofing behind that cement or that, you know, mud or whatever, because you have that added layer of protection where you might not have it if you use one of these other products. Right. And that's one of the things I really appreciate that you do, because I've never tried it and it scares me.
Totally.
The things that haunt our dreams in our 30s, right?
It's weird. Believe me, when I first started and I spread my wings and I was like, I'm going to do this on my own, my first couple showers, oh my gosh, yeah, I was terrified, and I was just going over everything a million times, like, because it's something that could fail, it's not just tile is one thing, but then you add water in the mix and you're like, okay, now this is going to be a longevity thing. Like we need this to work for a long time, and water is going to be constantly going in here. So, doing a hot mop and making sure that you have the right materials is everything for sure.
Do you get called in a lot to fix DIYs that are awry?
I've actually been called quite often, more recently too, with people that have used decorative tiles and stuff like that have been done wrong, and coming in and doing, fixing mistakes and stuff. But I don't, it's hard for me to get to stuff like that, because I'm busy myself doing my own jobs, and
right.
It could be tough. But yeah, I get phone calls like that.
When I bought the house that we're currently living in, the previous homeowners disclosed that the shower in the master suite, which was just kind of a stand-up, very narrow thing, they're like, not usable, cracked shower pan, subfloor damage. And I was like, okay. And I took that on because I knew I was going to remodel the remodel the whole master bathroom. I demoed out the floor, right? And they had a mortar bed under it. So the way they did the tile seemingly was in, like the way you did it. Mm-hmm. As soon as I got through the mortar bed and everything, fell right through the floor. Like the subfloor was so, fortunately I only have a crawl space beneath my house. So I only fell like, less than a foot, or, in that area.
Oh, you have
pretty
a raised
shallow.
foundation?
It's a raised foundation.
I love raised foundation homes.
I love it if I could actually move around it. I'm from the East Coast, where we have basements where you can work in the basement and do stuff instead of
stand up,
instead of claustrophobia city,
being in a hole in the ground.
So anyway, the subfloor, the shower pan had cracked at some point. Wow. Years and years of water damage had gotten down there onto the subfloor, and termites had gotten in there, ate through all the subfloor. It was tongue and groove 2x subfloor. Like, it wasn't plywood. It was because this house was built in the 30s. Yeah. But it had just gotten so much water damage. Termites had gotten in there and just Swiss cheesed it. Oh. And as soon as that tile and that mud and everything wasn't there to hold it all together, the wood just went. And fortunately, I have experience and was able to go in there and fix it and remodel the bathroom and all that stuff. But that's my fear of doing those, tile shower pans, or like, so I always,
when you see it firsthand, it's like, this is what could happen. And, you're in it deep now, because it's like, you're just having to do more and more stuff. It wasn't just tile. Now we need to do some framing. We need to, exactly. There's a lot more things going on.
And if there's ever a time you don't want to fall through a floor and call for help, it's when you're naked, if we're being honest.
Well, I certainly wasn't naked when I was doing my renovations.
Just let's put that on the list of like things we want to pay attention to.
So This is an issue that I've run into a lot, and I kind of want to get your feedback. One of the biggest issues that I have when I'm trying to do tile a new space or replace a floor is making the floors line up with the surrounding floors, from room to room. How do you go about doing that? How do you evaluate how you can
when you mean go through, are you talking about like height differences?
Yeah, like elevation between. Let's say I want
like
to
a wood floor or something.
I have hardwood in, let's say, my dining room, and I'm tiling a kitchen, but it used to just have like linoleum or something on it. How can I figure out how to get the two levels to match up?
Totally.
Like, what do you do?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. I was just getting text messages from one of my builders this morning regarding that, because we have a wood floor outside the bathroom, and then the material that they picked for the bathroom floor is 3/4 of an inch thick.
So it's 3/4 of an inch.
So it's like,
powder?
Okay, yeah. Well, no, the material itself is 3/4 of an inch thick. And so they were asking me, like, what are we gonna do? And that's just it. Is you only have a few options, and the matte stuff really comes in when it comes to trying to keep it as thin as possible, basically, because it was a raised foundation. I have to have, you can't tile on wood.
Because of the wood movement?
The movement, yes,
cracks?
exactly. Okay. So, you'll get cracking and it's not good. So the thing with that new mat stuff, it's literally like 1/8 of an inch. And, you fill it with thin set. It's interesting, but that's a great option to have now, because before that you had, Hardy backers, the thinnest you could get is 1/4 of an inch.
Right.
And then however thick, the material is plus thin set, you're starting to go up, and then if you have a wood floor or something that you're going to, that does have a problem, So I always, from the very beginning, when I step in, to a project, I always ask that question. Okay, what are we going to, what's our thickness there? And a lot of times a good wood floor guy usually adds another layer for me, really, to have it floated and it be flush, and have that smooth transition. But yeah, there is always those situations, and you could either have some sort, you got to get creative, really, whether you put some sort of threshold, to transition from that height thickness, or, you have those T-moldings, and
right.
There's different things like that to try to help with the thicknesses. But yeah, I mean, that could be a problem, and it just is what it is. There's always situations where you're coming across like, oh shoot.
Yeah, I have a couple scenarios where that's happened to me. One, the master bathroom that I was just referring to, and then I reached out to you a while ago because I have in the entryway of my home, my foyer area has this old like slate tile, and it's cracked and splintery, and now my son is mobile and moving, and the tile's sharp, it's broken.
Yeah.
And so I don't like him walking or crawling on it, and it needs to be replaced. But I reached out to you because I said, well, it looks like to me they just use this black tarry type adhesive. I don't know what it is. Probably asbestos. Who knows?
Most likely.
Yep. And I like to just kind of think that it's not.
Yeah.
But, and I don't have a lot of leeway. Like the tile is like this slate thin, 1/4 inch thick tile maybe. And there's like this black substance that they use as an adhesive, and then it's subfloor, it's wood, and it's what you're talking about. It's why it's probably cracked and broken, is because they put it over the wood. But surrounding rooms that the foyer goes into, the hallway goes into the living room, they're level right now. So I'm like into this scenario where, how am I going to retile this and make the floors line up? And I don't really have an answer. I'm like, well, what do I do? Do I plane down the subfloor so that I can go down a little bit?
That's usually what people do. Yes, I've been in a situation like that, and that was literally the only thing that we were able to do to achieve that. And yeah, it takes a lot of work, to make that happen, but that's what you'll most likely have to do,
Yeah.
And
fortunately, the subfloor, like I said, it's old 2x tongue and groove, so I can.
There you go.
I can plane it down a bit, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Yeah.
And then in regards to the master bathroom, when I encountered that kind of a similar issue, because I had to replace the whole subfloor, I ended up going plywood, and I used kind of the long form, or large format wood porcelain
wood planks. Yeah.
But in the bedroom itself, I just went down to the in there they had old Doug fir tongue and groove subfloor that I didn't realize was there, and I just refinished them.
Oh,
so
wow.
There was no way for me to really line those up. So I did what you're saying. I kind of did a decorative transition, and it's a little bit proud. The bathroom is a little proud of the floor in the bedroom, but it doesn't. I just took a piece of oak that matched, or Doug fir that matched the floor, put a little bevel on it.
There you go.
You don't really notice it.
No. And that's actually somewhat common. Like when I go to houses, the bathroom, as you enter that bathroom, a lot of times you're stepping up a little bit.
Up.
If you notice that. Yeah.
And
I think that's because of the reason.
Yeah. As long as it's not like a snub nose edging. If you put like a bevel on it or something where you're kicking your toe on it.
Yeah, well, we had that. Everyone who had come into our kitchen wood trip, when we just got our kitchen demoed, there was tile on top of tile, on top of vinyl, on top of vinyl, on top of subfloor. And I actually have a picture of it.
Are you serious?
No,
Yeah, we'll have to post that on
my
there.
gosh.
We were always like, gosh, the ceilings are low. Is it because of the soffit? Well, when they pulled out the tile, we were like, our house looks so big. And then they pulled out the soffit and we're like,
oh my gosh.
It's just, we gained like that much on our floors. Has anyone ever
that's
asked you to tile on top of tile?
No, thankfully
and what would you tell
not.
them?
I would say you're crazy.
Well, she had it.
Hey, it's a cheap DIY. You know, I mean, hey, just
Investors, they just came and flipped our house.
Yeah,
I've seen
I'm
people
sure.
do that for a backsplash, in a kitchen backsplash. I've seen that because people sometimes they go right on top of the drywall and they don't want to peel the old tile off and.
Totally.
So I've seen it in the backsplash, and you can use those trim pieces kind of on the edge.
You could get away with that, yeah,
but
because
not
that's
for a
just
floor.
it. Is it's a heavy traffic or even a water area. No, I probably would not do that.
Yeah, it's not
Well, you
good.
had a pocket door on your
pocket
kitchen
door that wouldn't open. We were always like,
they tiled it in, so the door you couldn't even open it.
and then
Oh,
a refrigerator. When we moved into our house, we were like, why is there no refrigerator? Because usually a house comes with the refrigerator and the stove.
Yeah.
So we go to like wheel in our refrigerator, and we're like it won't fit into the cabinets.
Oh
It's
my
because there
gosh.
was tile on top of tile. So my husband
jeez.
bootleg pushed the cabinets up. I'm glad that's gone.
Yeah.
And they never sealed
Behind
our
you now?
tile either. So it was just gross.
Oh
and
man.
I actually have a question for you about our flooring. We just made our kitchen and dining room open concept. So we want a flooring that can go through the entire downstairs of the house, with the exception of the rooms. We'll keep carpet for the kids. We had another guest on, Eileen, and we were talking about ROI, and her personal preference was wood. She's a realtor. So I kind of got in my head thinking, man, we were going to do the large tiles that look like wood. So then I got in my head thinking, we really should do wood. And then I watched my 2-year-old look me in the eye with direct eye contact and just go like this to a cup of milk the other day. And I thought,
Classic.
This is happening.
yeah, what are you going to do? I'm
Pouring out
so
for my
cute.
preschool homies.
Exactly.
She does it. Yeah, exactly. She has the little teardrop tattoo. She's a very confident young
She's
child.
gangsta.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, anyway, so then I thought, gosh, the upkeep on hardwood is probably not a good idea. So what do you think about the wood tiles throughout the bottom of the home and upkeep on those?
Totally.
The wood look tiles.
Yeah, that's just it. Is there's pros and cons for both, you know, and the con for the wood floor is obviously the maintenance on it, you know. But then you have the warmth, you know, and it feels more like homey to me. Yeah, definitely. And so with the tile, the con is the fact that it's cold but it's so durable, and that's just it, is people want that durability. So it is really hard. It's kind of a toss up. But then again, there's always the matted heated floors that you could put underneath that would eliminate the fact that, you know, it's cold. So you always have that option too.
What's the upkeep over time? Like if we did tile, I just think like grout. Like there's grout throughout my whole home. Is that hard to upkeep, or how do we keep that?
I mean, as long as you keep the grout joints really tight, a 1/16 of an inch, and you get a grout color that will just blend right in. I mean, it doesn't look dirty, you know, and that's just it, is you could beat that stuff up, you know, and it'll take a beating. So with little kids and stuff, I think it's great. You know, it's totally, for a practical dad, you know, I think it's awesome, you know. But as far as a resale value, I don't know. It's really hard to say, because tile is a good thing, you know. People, especially even if you're looking at it as, well, I could even rent this. Then you're thinking tenants and, you know, that part of it too. I think, well, I would want tile because they're just going to beat it up and, you know, and it's going to be able to handle it, you know. So I think of that as well.
I'm never a fan personally of hardwoods anywhere near the kitchen, just because of the water issue. You know, the water gets on that hardwood and you're screwed. You know, you got a overflowing sink or a plug or gets under it. It's going to bubble up. It's going to bubble up your seams. It's going to. So I personally would never put hardwood in, you know, in a kitchen.
You know what happened at sorry to interrupt you, at our old house, our Christmas tree we had water in our Christmas tree and some got onto the floor, and actually the Christmas tree, as it absorbed the water, it pulled up our wood floor all under our Christmas tree.
Yeah, that's the drawback of, but they have so many products now too, like that are kind of wood look, watertight kitchen products. I've seen them. I can't think of the material that they're made of or whatever, but there's some kind of probably plasticky chemical mixture of something, but they look great. They're supposedly super durable. I haven't personally used any of those products yet, but that also could be a good option for you. For me, I love the look of tile. It's not as forgiving, on little kids when they fall as some wood and stuff like that, but durability and cleanliness, easy to keep, low maintenance.
Totally.
For kitchens, I'm going tile all the way. Let's talk about budget a little bit. Okay. How can a homeowner, like maybe that's on a tight budget, get a really elegant look or like a really clean look with their tile? Any recommendations on where they can get tile or what to do?
I mean, the bigger box stores will always be cheaper, and doing something classic that doesn't go out of style, that's simple, is always a good thing. If you're doing just a white subway dowel tile, a lot of people go that route because it's cheap, it's classic, it doesn't go out of style, and fairly easy to install.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned before, another way to keep costs down is to kind of mix your own materials and do some of the things that you're talking about, as opposed to using these.
Absolutely.
So if you could do that, get a white subway tile, make it classic and clean, and make sure you just keep it white. And
totally.
Do you have any tips on durability with grout, or how to, like, in our last home, our backsplash, the grout would always get, when like the spaghetti sauce would bubble, it would like get in my grout, and it was so annoying.
Yeah.
So what are some ways to treat your grout or products to use?
Absolutely. So there's Laticrete's one of the biggest companies out there. They have an epoxy grout. Well, there's a few other companies. I tend to always get Laticrete just because it's more available. But epoxy grout, believe it or not, does not stain. So you could get white epoxy grout on a backsplash, and it's gonna be white. So yeah, that's one thing. It's more costly, but at the same time, it's epoxy. So I mean, it's not gonna crack. It's not gonna stain. It's bomb proof. So spending a little bit more money, on good quality products like that help in the long run.
With an epoxy grout, is it the same process that you would? Yeah,
No,
I would think
harder.
It would be really hard to get off the tile.
So yeah.
So talk about, maybe explain to people the typical grouting process, and then maybe how an epoxy grout would differ.
A normal, pre-mix grout, it's in a powder form. You add water, done. Mix it to your liking. And it's pretty easy. It's easy to work with epoxy. You have a part A, part B, mix those together, and then you have your powder. That's the color of the grout that you add in. And the downside with it also, well, some people might say you could do it, but you have to use the entire thing. I'm not going to sit there and like save a little bit of part A and part B, for the next job. You have to use the whole thing. So with that being said, it's like, okay, I have to use this entire, batch for this little backsplash, and that's expensive. You're having to use that entire thing.
What's the working time? Is it like similar to a typical grout?
I've come to find out that it actually is, it wants to set up faster.
Yeah.
So I'm always like, like hurrying up, and it's like, oh no, I got to start washing, it's like, so yeah, it's a little more challenging. But like anything, there's a learning curve, and after a couple of them, I had it down, and I know what to do now. So
one of the things that I had to do a little bit of DIY research on when I started doing a lot of the tile jobs is grouting with sanded grout versus unsanded grout or non-sanded grout. What's the difference there, and when should people consider one versus the other?
Non-sanded is for grout joints that are smaller than 1/8 of an inch. So when you have small, areas that you don't need the sand is basically to fill the void. So anything 1/8 of an inch bigger, you get sanded. And then, so, say with like a brick or something, I'll even add silica sand. If you know what silica sand, I'll throw that in my batch of grout to have bigger grout joints if I'm doing like Saltillo, Old Spanish, things like that. So yeah, it's definitely having to do with the thickness and filling that void.
When you go to the big box store, there's a lot of options on the shelves for tile adhesives, or sometimes they call them like mastics, and then a lot of different options for thin sets or different mortars. When you walk down that aisle, you're like, and you maybe haven't done a lot of tiling before, you're like, there's a lot of things here to like sort through. Which one do I actually need?
Right.
Can you give us a little information on when you might use like one of those pre-mixed mastics or tile adhesives that it's just called tile adhesive at the store versus like a thin set mortar bag?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tile adhesive mastic is for areas that aren't high water. So perfect example is a backsplash. You have, just drywall, you're needing to stick on there. That mastic is awesome. It hardens so hard and it sticks so well. The downside is you do not want to put that in an area where there's a lot of water, because what happens is it could re-emulsify. So I've seen situations where people have used that stuff in a shower and literally tiles are falling off. You get one steamy shower and all of a sudden you've got not good, right?
No.
So yeah, so a backsplash, things like that, that's not a high water area. Highly recommend it. As you get onto something like a cement floor, like a slab floor, you're wanting a really strong, durable, these there's so much product now. It's crazy. I can't even keep up. I'm still learning all the stuff that's coming out, but yeah, so you want a cementatious type thin set that has like certain acrylics in it that is going to grab onto, the cement. And so that's what I use for my mortar bed in showers. I use a really strong acrylic type thin set. And you need that stuff. A lot of it depends on what you're using the thin set for. If you're using a thin set to just, say you're back buttering your cement backer board to glue down on, you don't need a really expensive, the top of the line thin set. You could get a cheaper one that doesn't have all that special stuff to glue down on the floor. That's really all you're using it for.
Explain to me and the audience, like back buttering. When you say back buttering,
yes,
what is it? And is there a way to do it wrong? Do you want to follow the direction of the tile, or can you like crosshatch?
Back buttering, the only, I get people saying like, why aren't you back buttering your tiles? And I'm tiling with 3x6 tiles. And it's like, could you imagine having to back butter every single one? It's not, there's no reason for it. They say that a large format tile is anything larger than 16 inches. So 16 inches, 16 by 16 or whatever, that is considered large format. That's when you want to start back buttering, because what happens is there could be voids. When you're slapping those big old tiles down on the floor, there could be that void there, and that's you don't want voids in your,
It's like it's an empty air pocket beneath the tile. So like if you drop a hammer in that spot where that air
right
pocket,
in the middle or something, yeah, it'll just shatter, especially most large format tile is porcelain anyways. And when that stuff shatters, it's glass. I mean, I've cut myself crazy with a broken piece of porcelain tile. It's crazy.
So for small format tiles, you don't really need to back butter?
You don't need to. And again, it goes back to when I was talking about it earlier, is testing your installation. And so really, I mean, all it takes is you setting it, pop it up and look and see if you're getting that full coverage. If you are, you're good. So that's just is when I start stacking smaller tiles, I'll pop one off every once in a while, make sure I'm getting my full coverage and continue on my way. But yeah, especially and that's another thing I was going to talk about was the the plank tiles, those
The
wood-looking
yeah.
ones. Those you really need to, because most of them have this natural bow in them because of them being so long. You know, they've got this natural bow. So that's asking for some voids there, you know. So back buttering those things is huge.
The idea is that when you're tiling,
Yes.
right, you're taking a notch trowel, say it's on a wall, you're running you're taking a scoop of your thin set mortar or your mastic or whatever, notching it against the wall. And then the back buttering process is flipping the tile over to its back, taking a scoop of that same mud or whatever,
Yeah.
putting it on the back of it and spreading it across.
Skimming it.
Skimming the back coat so that
Yep.
when you press that tile up against the wall or the floor or whatever, it's filling all the voids that are created by the notch trowel on its
Exactly.
opposite.
Exactly.
So it kind of goes together. And then as that air is all pushed out,
Yep.
everything sucks together.
Exactly. So when you're combing, yeah, I and that's another thing is combing certain directions. That's even like a thing that I think of. It's funny. But like say you have a long tile going this way, right? And then it's narrow this way. I tend to comb where there's less travel to escape. So I'm not going to comb my
Lengthwise.
going this way. I'm going to comb it this way. So that way when I push down, it's escaping in a shorter distance.
Oh,
So
makes sense.
that's another little tip that, you know, a lot of people don't really realize, but that it helps a lot.
I've got 2 more questions, and then I think we'll jump into some voicemails.
Cool.
Number 1, DIY tile tools. What 4 or 5 tools does a homeowner need to get started, and where can they get them?
It would have to be a saw, obviously. You need to cut the tile. There's a couple options too. Actually, there's, you know, that old school like scoring type
Scoring
thing.
and snap it tile.
Score and snap. You have that cutter, which is good for porcelain. I mean, when you have those planks and you have a scorer, I mean, that works amazing. And then obviously a normal saw. I've got a few of them.
Like a wet saw.
A wet saw. Yep. So that's super important. That's what I love about tile is that you don't need a bunch of crazy power tools and expensive tools. I mean, I just have a notch trowel and a margin trowel and I'm ready, you know. The rest is just my handiwork, you know. So a couple of tools like that and you could pretty much tackle most of your DIY stuff.
I have usually like a 1/4-inch trowel. I think it's kind of a generic,
Yep.
pretty good size
It is.
notch trowel. That's what I mean by 1/4-inch notch trowel. It has 1/4-inch notches in it. I use that. I have I have a rigid wet saw that works pretty well. It has a little diamond blade on it.
Yep.
Then I have a pair of like tile nibblers. I don't know if you use
Yeah.
those, but those are like for making radius cuts in tile if you need to follow a radius. And you can get all these tools in the tile section at Home Depot, Lowe's, wherever,
Absolutely.
and they're not super expensive. The
Nope.
tile saws can get expensive depending on the ones that you get because they have a lot of options. But beyond that, then just like a masonry trowel and like a mortar mixer that I put on the end of a drill. Usually,
Exactly.
that's really it. I mean, beyond that,
It's not a lot. It doesn't take much.
I just use a Yelp app and a credit card, and that's really all I've ever needed to use, and everything's come
And a
out
phone.
really well.
and a phone to call Adam.
Exactly.
Or nowadays it's YouTube. It's
Yeah.
you know, it's so great like that we have so much at our fingertips now. You know what I mean? It's amazing. I could learn anything
There's
by
just-
jumping on YouTube.
That's true. That is true. I mean, we have a standing rule in our home. The 2 things that we hire are electric and tile.
Wow.
Like those are just kind of like just
2 of my favorite things to
can
do
go wrong.
myself.
Things can go wrong. Well, you know what? I think it's how much time do you have
Exactly.
too? Do
That's
you have time to
exactly
tile?
right.
It's not
It's
let's do
true.
it after the kids go to bed type thing. It's,
Right.
I can really appreciate
Totally.
the work that you do because tile is labor intensive,
Yeah.
like surprisingly labor intensive. And I've done, I did my son's kind of Jack and Jill bathroom recently, and I did the floor and the tub surround.
Good
and
for
it
you.
took me like
That's awesome.
It took me 2 days just to do the tub surround of like laying tile, because one at a time, not big sheets, as little subway tiles, and just putting them up. And it takes a long time, surprisingly long time. And the flooring was hexagon tile, which I've never done before. So the
Hexagons
layout was tricky.
It's a lot of cuts.
6 sides of lippage, it's
and then
time
when
consuming.
you're going to the corners, I mean you're cutting almost every single tile. You have to,
That's
so,
where layout
difficult.
was really important. And the way that I did that was I actually measured the tile, and rather than laying it out in the room, and I talk about this in nearly every episode, I pre-vised it. I took those measurements and what I knew my grout spacing was going to be.
Right.
And I duplicated it in Google SketchUp.
Nice.
And measured the room. And I just put it all in one thing, and I just shifted that whole floor around until I found the best layout to where I had the least amount of cuts.
No way.
Wow.
How did that work out? Did that work out good for you?
Yeah, phenomenal.
That's awesome,
As opposed
Aaron.
to, because you can't lay out and get a true sense of where the tiles are going to fall if you're laying it out on the floor.
Sure.
Because you have to waste a bunch of tiles to make the cuts to then get an idea of really where the cuts are going to fall.
Yeah.
And then you're already doing the work, and you're really into the install. So for me, it was just like, all I did was took my material, measured it, made a digital version of it, and superimposed this big, duplicated a bunch of times into this big area. And then I could make that into its own group and just drag the group around my floor plan until I found out where would be the least amount of cuts.
That's cool. And it worked out great.
It worked, yeah.
It's funny, a lot of times, because I work with designers a lot. And so I get plans, and it's like, you have this AutoCAD of what it's going to look like. And it's like, this is how we want the layout to be, And it's always just something where it's like, well, it looks good on paper, but we have this issue and we've got this, and but yeah, it's cool when it finally is actually working out to
falls together.
So yeah, it falls together to what we have initially planned.
So if you are going to hire someone, like we're planning to do, what are some things you ask the tile guy to make sure they're the right person for the job? Because we see all these horror stories where tiles are like upside down and backwards.
Well, being a tile guy, when I get to a job for the first time, it's more me that has all the questions.
Okay.
And so if I have somebody that's coming, if they've got a lot of questions for me, the more the questions, the more confident that I am and more qualified they are, in my opinion, because they know what they're talking about. They know, okay, what are we going to do for here? What trim are we going to have, when we're coming right here? And, there's tons of stuff that is like, all right, we need to throw this out and we got to figure all this stuff, So that is a big thing.
So do your homework.
Do your homework, yeah, and make sure that you have a plan, basically,
One last question before we move on to some other stuff. I feel like we could keep this episode going forever. Maybe we need to do a part 2.
Totally.
And, really dive into some more nitty gritty details. But there's a lot of tile options for materials. There's porcelain, there's ceramic, there's cement, all these different types of material for the tile itself. Mm-hmm. Can you just give us maybe a brief example of what the various types might be good for? Is porcelain tile better for a floor, for example, or for a shower?
Yeah.
Vice versa.
Yeah. And you just answered it. But yeah, porcelain, it's super dense. It's super durable. So, I mean, you could put that anywhere and be confident in the fact that it's going to do its job, and it could take a beating. So floors, exterior, you could take that stuff anywhere. Ceramic is very common in a shower, because most ceramic has a glaze on it, and that could also chip. So, a high traffic area, you probably don't want to go that route. You have glass tile, and glass, obviously, a lot of people use it for backsplashes and stuff because you could wipe it clean and it's, done. So there's that. What else? Like cement tiles. Cement, and it's crazy. A lot of people use cement tiles on the exterior, which blows my mind, but it looks cool when it's a little scuffed up anyways, right? I mean,
True.
Yeah.
but it does get scuffed up. And, you know, if you don't like that look, then you probably don't go with cement tiles. But again, it goes to sealing, having, you know, it's a lot of sealing, a lot of maintenance and stuff. So be aware of that with that product, with that material.
Just make sure if you're installing a tile, whatever the material that you choose, a porcelain, a ceramic, it's already kind of pre-sealed, ready to go, with the exception of the grout lines that you want to add a grout sealant to. But unless you're using an epoxy grout.
Right.
But if there's other things that are more porous materials, cement, marble, is marble more of a porous one?
Yeah. So marble, like any type of stone, you know, it starts to age, you know, and I've dealt with a lot of like Carrera marble, you know, that kind of stuff. Like if you don't continue to seal it, if you don't continue to keep it maintained, it starts to have a dirty look to it. It could even like start yellowing, and you know, there's that stuff too. So very high maintenance, you know, but it's beautiful. I mean, you're working with natural stone, you know, it's gorgeous.
Right.
But on the flip side, it is more, you know,
high maintenance.
So something to consider as a homeowner is how much maintenance you want to do on this on a regular basis. Do I want something that's just going to be durable, throw it down, not have to worry about doing anything? Or do I want maybe a more beautiful, or maybe not even more beautiful, but, you know, a certain look.
Right.
But I'm willing to do the maintenance.
Right.
I want to get maybe your top 5 tips for a DIYer like myself to up my tile game so that I can tile like a pro.
Obviously, I would say in the very beginning, layout, you know, just really make sure you're laying it out right. Next would be, you know, picking something that's not crazy hard. Obviously, you don't want to, hey, for my first project, I'm going to do these penny rounds on a backsplash, you know.
I wouldn't recommend.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
So number 3, start small, you know, like have a small area. Use something that's more, you know, a little more easier, you know, do like a square tile, you know, in the beginning.
Yeah, I don't recommend using like the hexagon floor tiles that I've used for a bathroom floor or for any floor. I would not recommend that be your first tile project.
Right.
Thankfully, it wasn't mine because I would have pulled my hair out.
Was that 3? I think so 4, try not to cut corners, because when you're going at it, you got to know, okay, this is going to be tedious. This is time consuming. Don't think that there's some little trick there, because there really isn't. You just gotta do it, you know, and own it.
So don't do it on a Saturday for a Christmas on Monday.
Don't think, I'm just gonna throw this up in a couple hours like you did. Yeah. Because most likely it's gonna take a while. So
unless you're
have
using
patience.
Huge.
Yeah, exactly. There's 2 tiles and you're done. Yeah, do that. I would say recommend. But so yeah, there's that. I'm at 5, I think now.
Yeah.
Yep.
5. I don't know what 5 would be.
So
have the right tools, maybe.
So yeah, have the right tools, and also even down to the fact that like use a grout color that's the same color as the tile, because that'll hide a lot of imperfections, right? Don't do a white penny round with black grout, because that's like, you're going to see every single thing, you know? So avoid stuff like that and you should be fine.
Awesome.
And yeah, and watch a lot of YouTube videos, I guess.
Yeah, I've got a couple of shameless self-promotion. I've got a couple of tile videos now that I've talked to Adam, I need to re-edit them and make them better, but maybe we'll do some collaborative ones and you can teach me some techniques later on.
That would be awesome.
We have a few voicemails that I want to dive into if you don't mind.
Don't mind at all.
Some of our audience has called in with some questions that I think, some of which we've a little bit touched on, but some that we haven't touched on quite yet. So we'll dive into those right now.
I've seen the YouTube videos lately where people are using a product called Red Guard. It's pretty expensive. Is it necessary?
So Red Guard question, which is, I've used it.
So that Red Guard is a crack prevention waterproof membrane. So it depends on where you're using it. you know, if you're hardy backering, this is when I see it the most. When you're hardy backering a like a tub surround, for instance, I would highly recommend using that product just for your corners and for, you know, for all that area that's going to be moving. And, you know, it's an assurance thing. I'll roll it right over the concrete slab and just crack prevention, you know? So things like that, I would say, yeah, it's a great product. There's another company, Latacrete, that has a similar product called Hydroban. It's like almost twice as expensive, but the stuff is insane. And I use it for like if I'm doing a like a water fountain. I used the last time I used it. Just rolled that stuff all inside before I started setting my tile, and it is bulletproof, you know? So yeah, it's great for certain applications. Do you need it for everything? No, but it all depends. The best answer, it depends.
It's exactly what you said, though, is exactly how I've used it. I used it in my the bathroom that I mentioned that I remodeled recently with the tub surround. Yeah. I used a cement backer board I put up there.
Perfect.
I taped the seams with, you know, like the backer board tape.
Yep.
In the corners and anywhere. I did a little niche, you know, a little nook,
yep.
Shower nook. So yeah, and it's very easy to install. It is a little expensive,
totally,
but it's a liquid waterproofing membrane. It looks pink when you open it up. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like you paint it on with either a brush in the corners or roll it like with a roller.
Yep.
And I just caked it over the, you know,
totally.
The shower surround. I put it on the floor too because
why not?
Why not?
You had the product.
I had it.
Exactly.
And so I was like, I'm just going to put it over the whole thing. It's an added waterproofing thing. I've seen people actually do it up a little bit of the wall.
Yeah.
Up on the bottom, like where the cement board or whatever you're using as a substrate for your flooring meets the wall. I've seen people paint it up a little bit, like an inch or two onto the bottom where the baseboard goes.
Insurance.
Just to create, like, you know, if water gets there and it's not going to get on your, you know, you got a kid who overflows the bathtub, it's not going to seep over the floor and run to the drywall and swell up the bottom of the drywall and screw it up.
Exactly.
So it's a great product. It's an insurance thing. It's like a liquid plastic, and it, for a DIY thing, I really like it because, yeah, maybe you did make a mistake here or two, you know, here or there, and it's just an added level of insurance. So I would recommend using it for most things where there's a lot of water.
I agree.
Hi, I'm planning to tile my tub surround. How do I keep the first row in place? I'm afraid that the tiles will slide down or that they'll fall off of the wall.
The way I usually do it a lot of times is I'll leave that first row out.
That's what I did.
Yeah. And so, you know, I always find whatever the lowest point of the tub is, that's going to be the full tile, say. And then at that point, that line, go all the way around. And yeah, you could put like a little piece of stick or something to hold it. I'll even use one of my straight edges and just set it there and shove some tiles under it just to have a line there to start stacking my tiles from there. The next day, it's hard. You pull off that stick or straight edge, whatever you used, and then you cut in that first row. And that seems to be the best because chances are your tub is going to be not level, right, and your tiles need to be. So you're going to have, you know, one side is a little bigger than the other side. And yeah, it could be tricky in the beginning. So leaving that first row out and doing it after the rest set in is a good little tip.
So I think we've got one more voicemail here.
Cool.
So let's fire it up.
Hi, Aaron and Tracy. My name is Ellen. I'm calling because I had a question, actually. We recently tiled our bathroom, and we used a little plus sign shaped tile spacers, but when the mortar dried, we had a really hard time removing them. Is there a better spacer you could recommend?
I like the plus sign. That's funny. I'm like, oh, it is a plus sign. I've never thought of it. But yeah, so there's obviously different ways you could use that spacer, right? And one is smushing it in, you know, especially if you're just stacking. Let's say you've got 4x4 tiles and they're just stacked, so you could just push them in. You got to really make sure that they're pushed in. And there's actually I've actually had some spacers that they're called leave-in spacers, and you could shove those things in. They actually have little holes where they fill with thinset, and it becomes part of the thinset. It's crazy.
Oh, that's cool.
So there's those too. But yeah, that's a big thing, is making sure that they're not protruding. And if it got some thinset on it, it's not fun the next day trying to get that thing off, and trying to get it out, because you don't want to leave it in when it's, out a little bit, because when you're filling your grout joints, you're going to see it, it's there. So yeah, it could be time consuming having to sit there and pull them all out. So I would just recommend using the right spacer. And if you are pushing them in, push them all the way in. That way they're behind, and you could fill
grout
over it, and it's not, you don't see it when you're washing the grout,
I like to use these ones that are kind of horseshoe shaped. They're easier to, you can grab them easier. The plus sign ones, I know what they're talking about, because they can be, certainly if you turn them sideways and try to wedge them in there, they're near impossible to get out. But the horseshoe ones, you kind of stick them in like this. You can put one end under one tile, one end under the other tile, and then, they just pop right out. Or you take a hammer after you're done, and you just tap on them lightly, and they bing, 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 bing,
knock them all
and they
off.
pop out.
Those are awesome.
And then the other spacers that I like, that I've recently started to use, is kind of the self-leveling. I used them a lot on the hexagon tile to try and make sure that the lippage was even on all sides.
Yes.
They kind of go under the tile as you set it, and then they have like a little pin that goes in on the top, and it pulls the edges together.
Those are really popular now for the tile or the wood planks.
Yeah. Because
of what I was saying, those bows, that eliminates that. It's crazy, because you, like you said, you put that little wedge in there, and you have this tool, and you crank it down, and it just eliminates all of the lippage, and then it acts as a grout joint, or I'm sorry, a spacer. So I have them where they're a 1/16 of an inch, which if I wasn't using those, I don't think I'd be able to even get that close, that tight of a grout joint for those planks.
Right.
And now I can with that. I wish I invented that.
I know.
I mean, how genius. So the next day you just kick that off. You have to reuse the one, the
pin on the
little
top.
pin that it goes under the tile, but then you reuse the wedges. And I mean, it's such an amazing, I don't do those types of floors without them. That's how much I love that leveling system. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
So the professional answer would be, don't use the plus signy thingies. Use the horseshoe or the pinny thingies.
Pretty much.
That's right.
Okay.
Those are the technical names for them. Yes. You can find them
I like that
exactly
way. I like
at your big box store under those
I will remember
names.
that.
So walk into Home Depot, walk up to the rep and say, I'm looking for the horseshoe thingy tile spacer, and also the
pinny thingies.
Lippage minimizer pinny things where you have the wedge that drives in.
They'll know.
Like,
I know exactly.
This isn't my department.
Yeah. They'll be like, check the electrical aisle.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, Adam, thank you so much for being here. This has been like super informative.
So
It was
fun.
a pleasure. It was so much fun.
I love your work.
Thank you.
You're an awesome guy to meet in person finally.
Right on.
And make sure you guys follow Adam at Ale Tile
Yes.
on
So
Instagram.
good.
Yes, ALETILE.
Awesome work, even better person. We want to thank also you guys for calling in with your voicemail questions, and just remind you that the show is built on your suggestions, your questions, so make sure you call in 978-709-1040. Follow us on social media at the links in the show notes, or you can reach me via email at aaron@howtohome.com. And I want to say a quick thank you to FilterBuy for making this episode possible. Make sure you guys visit filterbuy.com to get all your HVAC filter needs.
And don't be shy. Make sure to rate us on whatever podcast app you're listening to, and screenshot us and let us know you're watching on Instagram stories.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Aaron.
We'll see you guys next time. The How To Home podcast is brought to you by FilterBuy.com, your one-stop direct-to-consumer replacement air filter brand, and is produced in collaboration by Amassed Media Group, LLC, and Intelligent Arts and Artists. The show is executive produced by George Ruiz and Aaron Massey.